The content, views, and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the producer and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the City of Bremerton, BCAT, their officials, or their employees. Hello, this is Mark Miller, and this is another episode of the Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers Creative Showcase. Today, I have a CLAW member here, an author, and as you can tell, he's got some books here, and this is Martin Francom. Martin Francom. I'm going to sit here. I keep mutilating the name. I keep dropping the R. How you doing, Marty?
I'm doing great, thank you, Art.
So, Marty here is also a veteran, which is why I have my veteran thing on, because even though this won't be broadcast before Veterans Day is coming up. So I wanted to remind everybody November 11th was and is Veterans Day and everything. So this is kind of like a little Veterans Day episode. And Marty is a member of CLAW, and he's also is an author, and he's also got kind of an interesting life. But we'll start out here with what did you do before you were a writer?
Well, I went to start out high school, of course, and ended up going to University of Utah and got a degree in pharmacy. After that, I had an ROTC scholarship there, which allowed me to see a little bit of the country. This is right at the tail end of the Vietnam period.
Right.
And I ended up in South Carolina at Fort Jackson and was the pharmacy officer there at the hospital pharmacy. After that, I only spent about 3 years in the military. The war shut down, and they were sort of reducing the military, so I decided, well, I'd give a try at opening my own pharmacy.
Okay.
So I eventually made it back home to Bremerton and opened up a pharmacy here. Had the medicine shop pharmacy over on Perry Avenue and had that for about 30 years or so. And then in about 2009 decided, well, actually in 2003 we had a very interesting, exciting episode. We had an armed robbery in the pharmacy.
Right.
That's when pharmacy no longer was fun.
Yes.
It's a whole different mindset to it. You start looking at everybody that comes in with sunglasses and a pulled down hat.
Yeah. Exactly. So kind of took some of the fun out of being a pharmacist.
Yeah, it does. And so I kept up the business until about 2009 and decided, it's time to retire. So
then when did you start writing?
Only 3 years ago. I used to write small little things for grandkids, short stories, little things. Yeah. And I have one book that's a collection of Grandpa's short stories that I didn't bring that one, but that had a lot of little stuff that I did for the grandkids. But my daughter actually is the one that got me seriously thinking about doing some writing. She said, Dad, you need to write your life story, and we really don't know what your belief structure is.
Yeah.
I was never a real strong religious type person, and whatnot, and she actually turned into be a much more religious conscious. So she wanted me to try to explain my belief structure. Yeah. So that got me writing the first few little stories. And after I got into that, I sort of liked that as sort of something to do in the retirement years, is to come up with these stories.
Yep. So you you are doing some historical fiction novels, and you've got 3 of them here. You want to explain them a little bit, and you also use self-publish, correct?
Yeah, I'm
Right now.
self-published on Amazon.
And you do your own artwork and things like that. So why don't you go ahead and talk about these 3 historical novels that you've got here?
Okay, the first one, which isn't the first one I did, but the first one on closest to you, Battle of New Orleans, that was inspired by the old Johnny Horton song, Battle of New Orleans, you know. And I thought,
it was
that would make it
1814,
interesting.
we took a little trip, yeah.
Well, let's talk about some of the characters that could have possibly there.
Yeah.
You know, there's lots of books on Battle of New Orleans talking about all the big generals and the other people that are in play. And I thought, you know, it need to be a little different. Wow, how about if we tell a story about 3 Cajun kids that decide to help General Jackson out on that battle? So that's what sort of prompted it. So we got these 3 kids, Jacques, Marie, and Henry, that are hear about the battle. The general is trying to enlist help from all the people around the area, and so they decide that they're going to do it. Now, one of the kids, Jacques, is a distant relative of one of the favorite pirates there, Lafitte.
Oh, Lafitte, okay.
Yeah, and so there's a little intrigue, and they eventually get together with Lafitte and help him out a little bit, and then Lafitte sends the kids in to General Jackson, and they have some assignments with them. I tried to use a lot of the Cajun dialect in the book, and I did have some help on that, which you know, I don't speak French, and I don't. I'm not a Cajun, so with the tools that you have on the internet now that allow you to
figure
help
what
things.
What it sounds like.
Yeah. So anyway, hopefully it doesn't. I put a glossary at the beginning to try to explain the different Cajun words that are being used in the story.
You have a Cajun, I guess they call it a patois, like you said, a dialect. And when I was working with U.S. Customs, I went to a training class, and one of the guys from New Orleans, he wasn't Cajun, but he hung around a lot of Cajun people. And so he used to tell these great jokes talking like a Cajun. We all would laugh and roll on the floor because they had all these expressions that they used every day that, of course, we heard them, and to us it sounded funnier than heck, you know, but stuff like that, And so that's one of the stories, and then you've got another one over here, Shadows of History.
That's a more current one. I just finished that up maybe a month ago or so, and that's a story about a struggling writer slash journalist in 1936. So it opens up with him, and he's renting a room in an attic from a landlady, and he's sitting there at his typewriter, he's reading over his latest rejection letter, and so he's all discouraged and decides to get up and wander around the cities in London there, and a big thunderstorm occurs while he's wandering the streets, and he's trying to find some shelter, and bumps up against this door. Building he's walked past 100 times and never really paid too much attention to it. Now all of a sudden the door opens up, and he's let in there, and he finds out that this is the St. Francis de Sales Club, Gentlemen's Club.
Yeah.
Do you know who St. Francis de Sales was?
No, the name sounds familiar, but I can't place it.
St. Francis de Sales was the patron saint of writers and journalists.
Okay. Yeah.
So, but he doesn't know that at this time. Anyway, so he gets in there, and that story is sort of based on the idea that you have this old building, and if these walls could talk, the stories they would tell. So
you like to write stories involving a lot of quote-unquote normal people
Yeah,
rather than,
yeah, the big figures.
yeah, we've had this discussion before about, you look at television and stuff, and everybody wants to be a lawyer, a cop, a doctor, first responder, military. They have very few stories about just normal people anymore. And so you like to write stories starting out with somebody who's pretty normal.
Yeah.
And then they wind up in unusual situations.
Yeah.
And your third book here, of course, you can explain, this is based on a song, correct?
Yeah, that's based on the night they drove old Dixie down.
Right.
And I guess it sort of made really popular with Joan Baez.
Right.
I like her version of it, although it was written by a Canadian. The song was written by a Canadian. I can't recall his name right at the moment.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, Canadian, and a Canadian band. But anyway, it's a story that talks about Virgil Caine before the war. His little farm his papa was a sharecropper to begin with, and ended up owning his own spot of land. And so he talks about the early days before the war, and then the days just prior to the war as the war was building up. Now, the three there would be one Virgil, his brother Samuel, and his cousin George. Now,
Okay.
George is from Boston. He comes down every summer to help work on the farm and learn what a little hard work's about. But he's a Bostonian, and he has northern ideas. And so during the build up to the war, they have a lot of discussions about southern
Slavery
rights and
and,
northern rights and that sort of thing. But
That's interesting. Okay.
so they end up going to war, and so it tells the story about them. Now, Virgil and his brother were stationed around Danville, and Virgil helped protect the Danville-Richmond train line.
Okay.
And he was pretty much infantry, and his brother was in a unit that was more cavalry, and his brother ends up going to do a raid on General Sherman's camp to try to gain some intelligence. Well, his cousin was the one that was setting up the defense lines and had heard about them, this raid going to occur, and set up an ambush for them. And his cousin ends up killing Samuel. George ends up killing Samuel. So you have that tragedy there that they have to work through in the story.
But it was based on the historical fact of families sometimes being divided, and actually
the idea of
the Civil War in some cases was a brother versus brother type of situation.
Exactly.
And so you wove that into the story once again, starting out with normal people stuck into an abnormal situation, and they have to rise or fall to the occasion.
Exactly.
And everything. And then you said you have a little bit of a sci-fi one down there.
Yeah, the last transmission is about an android that becomes sentient.
Right.
And his job was to go up on the space station and help man it. He's with other humans up there that were also on there, but the world is in conflict, and the humans are called back down to Earth
and
because
they leave him up
they
there
didn't
by
want to
himself.
get them stranded up there, and he's left up there to maintain the space station.
Right.
But throughout the story, he's had a lot of interactions with humans, and this idea of sentience and a lot of things that humans do, like spiritual base. And he gets injured on the space station after they left, and it's an injury that he is not going to be able to fix for himself. So he knows he's going to be shutting down. So he starts wondering, do I have a soul?
Yeah, do you die? Is he going to die?
He's going to cease.
Yeah.
Does he have a soul? And he ends up having sort of a spiritual connection.
Oh, okay.
And so it's a little different twist on the story.
Cool. So you must do a lot of research, especially with historical fiction, because I know I've done that where you're trying to write a story, especially if it's something you do like a military or whatever. So you try to make it as realistic as possible. So how much research would you say you wind up doing in each one of these stories?
The research, you're absolutely right. Yeah. To do a historical fiction properly, it takes a lot of research. Back in the 50s, you might spend months in the library trying to gather up the information that you need for your story. Today, with the tools on the internet, with Google, with the AI things, you can get pages of research and information in just seconds.
And then you can compare, contrast, try to figure out.
Yeah, you go through that and say, this would sort of work in my story. How could I work that in?
Sometimes you have to separate the opinions versus the facts.
Right.
And understand that some historians, when they write their books, they do sometimes put opinions in there about what happened. And so you're trying to balance that. Okay, is that actually what happened, or is that his opinion of what happened?
Right. And I'm not so much trying to make this a history.
Right.
I'm building the story around a few historical events.
Yeah.
But I'm not really trying to tell the story of that event.
Yeah.
I'm trying to tell the story of a person that possibly was involved with that event.
But of course, like you said, if you don't make it halfway accurate, somebody reading the book is going to go,
that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it makes no sense. That's not the way. It's not even close to what happened. Why'd you write it that way?
Yeah.
And then you get this big, these nasty grams and these big arguments. And so, you're doing the research. It's a fiction book, and that's why they call it historical fiction. We've got one author who's got a series on Lincoln where he does a lot of research, and especially on some of the not minor, but lesser known people that were involved with Lincoln that most people don't know about. So he started writing books about him, and it's quite fascinating how much history we don't know.
Oh, there's lots of history.
And so with you writing, especially this one, because that to me was Joan Baez is probably her best song she ever sang was The Day They Drove Old Dixie Down, because it had such a serious meaning and everything as to what she was talking about. And of course the time frame, because you and I are about the same age, and both are going.
Grew up in that 70 period,
Yeah, I wound up in the military for a while, post-Vietnam and all that other jazz. And so when she came out with that song, and she was trying to point out the fact, hey, this is a bad time also, in history and some of the same feelings.
Yeah, it's a heart tug type song. Interesting thing about that book is my relatives, my family came to New York, to the U.S. in 1865.
Oh, okay.
And so I have Virgil getting captured and being put in a prisoner of war camp in New York. And he meets up with my relatives.
No, there you go.
And he helps them travel to Utah.
Oh, okay, cool.
So I try to tie a little bit of my own family in there, because we didn't have any definite information of exactly after they got to the U.S.
Oh, yeah?
We had one story about them coming across on the ship from South Africa. Eventually, they were originally from England, went to South Africa, met Mormon missionaries there, and decided that they wanted to go to Utah to start. They were merchants primarily, but doing fairly well.
And then, so they moved out. Your family then was in Utah for quite a few years.
Yeah.
Basically, okay.
Yeah. Most of the Francoms are based out. There's only one family If you meet another Francom, we're related. We're a cousin of
got to
some
be at
sort.
least a cousin. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Oh, that's interesting. Well, I know it's not a. That's what I'm saying. I when I mention your name half the time, I drop the R. I want to say Francom, but it's Francom.
Francom.
Yeah, and so I don't mutilate it too bad. But yeah,
It means Freeman.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing is, like you said, you get in historical fiction, before you know it, you start kind of looking in your own family tree. And then like with my dad's side of the family, I did a little bit of research on how the cousin did this too. And I wound up going down pre-Google and stuff, went down to Salt Lake City where they had the huge library there,
Right.
and looked up all the censuses and found out I have a relative on my dad's side of the family in 1820 census who was full-blooded Ojibwa Indian.
Oh,
and
wow.
they listed his
You got
last.
some Native American
Oh yeah,
in ya.
he listed his last name as Race, R-A-C-E, which is unique. I don't know how they came up with that name for an Ojibwa Indian, but they did. And then my dad's dad, my granddad, his family came from Virginia and wound up out in Kansas. And I sometimes think I should have asked him when he was still alive, and I've got around doing it. Why did they move out to Kansas? I'm getting to think maybe it had something to do with the Civil War or the aftermath, and that's how they wound up out in the Kansas area.
Now they had that land run back then. I forget
Yeah,
exactly what
that was
year.
Oklahoma. Yeah, it was
Oh, that was-
Oklahoma.
that
It was
was
around,
in
that was in
Oklahoma?
the 1890s, but he was born in 1888, I think, right around there. I'm trying to remember. He told me stories of the end of the Old West. And so I'm going to write a Western, but it's going to be set in just before the Civil War, but it's going to be set in Washington Territory, because most people don't understand Washington State did not become a state until 1889. Oregon was like 1850, and California was around the same time frame. And they don't understand we were still a territory. So I'm writing historical fiction about what it would have been like in Washington Territory just before the Civil War, and all of the conflicts and on different opinions and all this stuff. And so, yeah, and then like you said, I'm going to have to do some research, because I can't seem to find a decent list of the settlements and towns in Washington. They've got Fort Walla Walla, and they mention Seattle and the Tacoma area, and that's it. But I know, and what used to be the Whitman's mission. But other than that, there's very few. I can't find a map, but there's very few. There must have been little settlements all over the place, and so that's what I'm going to have to go down and go to I think there's a museum in Tacoma that lists a lot of the actual settlements of the 1860s here in then Washington Territory and everything. So it's fascinating, because, like you said, you can tie your family family into it, and you have some very nice. You're very good with the covers, because they definitely grab your eye, and they're different, and so that you don't start using the same.
The covers were all AI generated. Since I'm a low budget type of, so.
But you've got
anything I can do myself, I try to do myself.
Well, it's AI generated, but I guess what I'm saying that people don't understand, it still comes from your brain, because you got to figure out what you're looking for.
What you want to have on the cover.
Because there's not going to be.
And generally, it doesn't. No. You don't get the cover you want the first try. You have to. No, that's not quite what I want.
Yeah.
Let's change my prompt.
Right.
And try to get a better.
And you got to do the manipulation, and you got to use your artistic sense.
Now, some of the covers, I'll generate a couple different images, then green screen out portions of the cover, and then combine the two images to get what I want.
Yeah, as opposed to going to Getty Photos or something like that and doing a stock photo, which a lot of people do, and that's the problem, is after a while you start looking, you get too many covers looking almost exactly the same. And then people wonder why they don't want to, people won't pick up your book.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyhow, I think I'm getting a wrap-up symbol from our little producer here. So I want to really thank you for coming here today and sharing your books and stuff, and hopefully you're going to keep writing, of course, and keep coming to the claw meetings.
Yeah, my next one is going to be steampunk novels.
There you go.
A series of steampunk.
I'll look forward to that one. So this is another episode of Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers Creative Showcase. Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers exists to help all the creatives out there, whether you be a writer, filmmaker, painter, we don't care. We try to help you get your creative urges and productions out there to the general public. We meet twice a month, the first and third Wednesdays, at Denny's on Kitsap Way. Usually we start around 7 o'clock. And we don't bite, we don't charge dues, you can just come there. We try to help each other out. We try to find venues where we can show our creative endeavors. And we're always at the Kitsap County Fair and Stampede. We're also at the Blackberry Festival in downtown Bremerton every year. And we're also go out and bounce around some of the other venues so we can bring our books or paintings or whatever we create and literally take a look at. This specific interview will be broadcast on Wave Cable, Astound, on Channel 3 at 6 o'clock on Saturday, and also on Channel 12 on Comcast, 6 o'clock on Saturday. So you can take a look at that. We also put up a copy of it on the Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers YouTube channel. So if you type in Claw up there, you should be able to eventually find. We probably have over 100 past episodes of a whole bunch of different creatives that have been interviewed for this show. If it wasn't for the Bremerton Kitsap Access Television staff and allow us to use the studio, this broadcast would not be created. At the same time, my publisher, Blue Forge Press, also has a film division, and they do the editing for these shows. So without those two entities, this creative showcase would not exist. All of you creatives out there, all of you potential writers and everything, think about coming to a meeting. And always remember, nothing stops you from trying to follow your creative urges. And with that, have a very excellent day, a nice month. Remember your veterans and pat them on the back. And also look forward to Thanksgiving. And with that, this is Mark Miller signing off. Good day.